remember the exact moment those words burned through the air and sank into my chest like knives. "I will humiliate this loser," he said, my daughter's fiancé. He didn't know I was standing there. He didn't know I heard every word. And maybe that was my blessing, because that moment changed everything. Before I tell you how I turned the tables, how the wedding everyone expected became something no one would ever forget, I just want to ask you, if you've ever been underestimated, looked down on, or treated like you were nothing, stay with me till the end. Like, share, and subscribe, because this isn't just my story. It's a reminder that life has a strange way of letting truth find its voice, even when the world tries to silence it. My name is Clara. I'm 56, and I've spent most of my life being quiet, invisible, and, if I'm honest, too forgiving. My daughter Isabel was everything I'd ever wanted to be. Graceful, educated, confident. She was the light I'd built my world around after her father left me when she was 10. I raised her on my own, working 2 jobs, saving every penny so she could have the life I couldn't. When she met Daniel, he was charming, in that polished, well-dressed, perfect smile kind of way. He worked in finance, came from an upper-class family, and spoke with that confident ease of people who never had to worry about grocery bills or overdue rent. At first, I thought he truly loved her. He would bring flowers, open doors, make her laugh, and he always called me Mrs. Lewis with such polite sweetness. But it was only later, after the engagement, that I started seeing the small cracks. The way he corrected her in front of others. The subtle mocking smile when I spoke. The time he laughed when I gifted them a handmade quilt and whispered, "How quaint," under his breath. It wasn't hate. It was something worse. Disdain dressed as charm. But Isabel loved him. She believed in him. And so I stayed silent, like I always did. The wedding was just 2 weeks away when I overheard him. It was at the country club where Isabel's friends had organized a small rehearsal dinner. I'd gone to the restroom and was returning when I heard his voice. That careless, amused tone he used when he thought no one important was listening. "She's harmless," he said. "Honestly, Isabel's mother is embarrassing, poor, unrefined, emotional. I'll humor her, but on the wedding day, let's see if she can handle a little attention." Another voice, one of his groomsmen, chuckled, "You're terrible." "Man," and Daniel laughed, low and cruel. "Please, people like her live for scraps of approval. I'll humiliate this loser without even trying." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The world tilted. Every sacrifice. Every night I went without dinner so my daughter could eat. Every tear I swallowed. All of it flashed in my mind. And in that moment, something inside me, something I thought had died years ago, woke up. Not rage. Not revenge. It was clarity. I smiled quietly, walked out of the club, and decided I would not warn Isabel, not yet. Because this time the silence would belong to me, and I would use it to build something unforgettable. The next few days were a blur of wedding chaos. Daniel's family treated me like a guest who had wandered in by accident. His mother, a woman with pearls for armor and a tongue sharper than glass, would often sigh and say, "It's so nice Isabel found stability. I suppose everyone needs a little charity in their lives." I would just smile. They mistook it for weakness, but I was already working on my plan. You see, I wasn't poor anymore, not since last year, when I inherited a small estate from my late aunt. It wasn't something I flaunted. I'd invested wisely, quietly building my financial security. To everyone, I was still the modest, struggling mother, and that's exactly how I wanted it. On the morning of the wedding, the sky was gray, the kind of gray that feels like it's holding its breath. I arrived early, carrying my small clutch in a calmness that no one could read. Daniel's family barely acknowledged me, too busy posing for photographs and rehearsing their smiles. Then came the moment, the one I had been waiting for. Right before the ceremony, Daniel approached me, straightening his tie with that smug grin. "Mrs. Lewis," he said softly, "I hope you don't get too emotional today. It's a big day for us, and I wouldn't want you to make it about yourself. For the first time, I looked him dead in the eyes and smiled. "Don't worry, Daniel," I whispered. "This day will be remembered, just not for the reason you think." He chuckled, confused, and walked away. If only he knew. When the guests were seated and the officiant began speaking, I waited quietly in the front row. The vows were sweet, rehearsed, almost mechanical. But then came the reception. During the speeches, Daniel's best man made a joke about how Daniel had to lower his standards for love, and laughter rippled through the hall. Even Isabel forced a smile, though I could see her discomfort. When it was my turn to speak, the microphone felt heavy in my hand. I looked around, at the chandeliers, the polished marble floor, the crowd that barely saw me, and then at my daughter, glowing in her gown, and I began. "My dear Isabel," I said, voice trembling. "You once asked me what dignity means. I told you it's something no one can take from you, unless you hand it over." A murmur swept the room. I smiled faintly. I've stayed silent many times in my life, to keep peace, to be polite. But silence has a sound of its own, doesn't it? It echoes until one day, it demands to be heard. Daniel's smirk faded. "I want you to know something, sweetheart," I continued, looking at Isabel. "Your mother isn't the poor, fragile woman some people here think she is. Not anymore." And then slowly I pulled out a folded document from my clutch. "The deed to my aunt's estate. I recently transferred all my assets to you, my only daughter. A gift. Not because you married into wealth, but because you don't need to." The room fell silent. Daniel blinked, his jaw tight. Gasps spread as whispers started. And as for anyone who ever thought to humiliate me, I said softly, "Thank you for reminding me how strong I've become." I placed the microphone down, walked out of the hall, and for the first time in years, I felt free. A week later, Isabel showed up at my door. Tears streaked her makeup. She had left him. She had heard everything. The recording. Yes, the one I took at the country club. It had spread through whispers among guests after the wedding. She told me she couldn't believe she almost married someone who disrespected her mother, her home, her past. And that night, she held me and cried. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have seen it." I just smiled. "Now you do. And that's what matters." Months passed. Daniel tried to reconcile, first with Isabel, then with me. But the door was closed permanently. Ironically, his company went bankrupt soon after. A deal gone wrong, a partner's betrayal. The universe, it seemed, had its own sense of balance. As for me, I moved into a quiet villa by the sea. Every evening I walk along the shore and feel the wind against my skin, not in triumph, but in peace. Because sometimes life doesn't need revenge, just truth, spoken at the right time in the right voice, and that voice was finally mine. It's strange how even after standing your ground, people still find ways to twist your strength into arrogance. After the wedding, after my speech, after the quiet gasp that rolled through that lavish hall, I thought the silence that followed would bring peace. But instead, it brought whispers. Daniel's mother, Eleanor, called me the next morning. Her voice was tight, brittle. "Clara," she said, "you've humiliated our family, publicly. What you did was unnecessary. Unnecessary." That word stung in a way I didn't expect. I almost laughed, almost screamed, but instead, I spoke softly. "You're right, Eleanor," I said. "It was unnecessary. But so were your son's words." And then, before she could reply, I hung up. For the first time in years, my hands didn't shake after an argument. That calm, that quiet, beautiful calm, it was new. And it felt sacred. But peace is never simple. Within a week, the whispers turned into full-blown rumors. Apparently, according to Daniel's side of the story, I had planned everything to embarrass them. That I was jealous, manipulative, a bitter mother who couldn't let go. Even Isabel was being pitied. People said she must be so embarrassed by her mother's theatrics. And yet, my daughter didn't say a word to defend me. Not at first. She disappeared, and for days. No calls, no messages, just silence. I told myself to be patient. She had just gone through something big. a public unraveling of the man she thought she loved. But that didn't stop the ache. Every night, I'd sit by the window of my small apartment and replay everything, my voice trembling at the microphone. Daniel's smug face falling apart. My daughter's blank expression in the crowd. Had I done the right thing? Had I saved her, or humiliated her too? That question haunted me. Then, on the 5th night, I heard a knock. It was late, almost midnight. When I opened the door, Isabel stood there. Her makeup was smudged, her hair messy, her eyes hollow. She didn't say a word, just collapsed into my arms and began to sob. It was a raw, broken sound, like years of belief collapsing at once. "Mom," she whispered between gasps. "He said he loved me. He said you were jealous. He said—" I held her tight. "I know," I murmured. "I know what he said." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with something that wasn't anger anymore. It was realization. "I found the recording," she said softly. My breath caught. "What recording?" "The one from the club." His voice, his friends laughing, my chest tightened. "I didn't mean for you to find that," I whispered. She shook her head. "No, Mom, I needed to. Because it showed me who he really was, and who you've always been." We sat on the couch until sunrise. She told me everything. The subtle insults, the way he'd started controlling her choices, his obsession with appearances. And finally, how she'd gone to his house to return her ring, only to find him already flirting with someone else, her friend. When she finished, she just sighed, drained. "I thought I'd never be enough," she said. "But you were right all along," I smiled weakly. "No, sweetheart, you were always enough. He was just too small to see it." After that night, things changed, slowly but deeply. Isabel moved back home for a while. At first, she barely spoke. She just helped me cook, cleaned, and sometimes sat in silence, staring into nothing. But one morning, she said something that made me realize how much she'd grown. "I used to think your quietness was weakness," she said, stirring her tea. "Now I know it's strength." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw myself at her age, still naive, still desperate for approval. Except this time, the cycle was breaking. A month passed. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. A thick, white envelope with Daniel's name on it. He wanted to talk. My daughter was hesitant. "Mom, maybe just ignore him." But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, told me to meet him one last time. So I did. At a small cafe near the marina, he arrived in a navy suit, perfectly pressed, but his face was different, pale, weary. He didn't even pretend to smile. "Clara," he began, "I didn't come to fight." "Good," I said, "because that's not why I'm here either." He took a deep breath. "I just want to say I was wrong. About you. About everything." I raised an eyebrow. "About humiliating losers?" He winced. "I deserve that," he said quietly. "I was cruel. I thought money and family meant power. But after the wedding, I lost investors. My reputation. Isabel's silence destroyed me more than your words ever could." There it was. Regret. Not loud, not grand, but real. I just nodded. "Sometimes life humbles us in the very language we speak," I said softly. He stared at me, lost. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "you treated kindness like weakness, and life returned the lesson." He swallowed hard. "Do you think Isabel will ever forgive me?" "I don't know," I said, "but I know she doesn't need to." I stood, ready to leave, when he said something that froze me mid-step. "You remind me of my mother," he murmured. She used to have that same look in her eyes, like she knew something the rest of us were too blind to see. I turned back, just once. "That look," I said softly, "comes from surviving people who think they're better than you." And then I walked away. That night, I told Isabel about the meeting. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she said, "You didn't go for revenge, did you?" I smiled. "No, I went for peace." She nodded slowly. Then you got it. And I realized she was right. For the first time in my life, I had chosen peace. Not silence, not surrender, not approval. Peace. Months went by. Isabel began to heal, to rebuild. She started painting again. Something she hadn't done in years. Her laughter returned, hesitant but real. And one morning, I found her in the garden, barefoot, holding a cup of coffee, sunlight catching her hair. "Mom," she said softly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't spoken that day?" I smiled, watching a butterfly land on a rose nearby. "All the time," I said, and every time I thank myself that I did. Because sometimes one act of courage, one moment of truth, doesn't just free you. It frees everyone who was watching, silently wishing they could do the same. I didn't sleep the night before the wedding, not because I was nervous, but because every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again. "I will humiliate this loser." Those words looped in my head like a curse. The arrogance, the cruelty, the hidden intention beneath his polished smile. I could feel it all. And every part of me screamed that something terrible was about to happen. But I also knew something else. That morning, when I looked at myself in the mirror, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just a mother afraid anymore. I was a woman who had learned, through years of heartbreak, that silence can be louder than any scream, and that dignity is the sharpest weapon you can ever carry. So when the sun rose and the house filled with laughter, perfume, and the sound of last-minute chaos, I just watched quietly. My daughter, radiant and trembling, was getting ready. Her friends helped her with her veil while her father adjusted his tie. Everyone looked perfect, except for the truth buried beneath their smiles. He arrived late. As usual, in his designer suit and that fake smile stretched too wide. People adored him, his charm, his confidence, his perfect little lies. I watched him as he walked in, shaking hands, hugging relatives, acting like he owned the air everyone breathed. And for a moment, I understood that this man didn't just want to marry my daughter. He wanted to own her, to mold her, control her, and then destroy her slowly, just like he'd tried to do with me in his subtle, poisonous way. Yes, he had tried to humiliate me once, but what he didn't know was that the woman he tried to break had already rebuilt herself piece by piece, stronger, quieter, and far more dangerous in her calmness. The ceremony began beautifully. Music, flowers, laughter. But just before the vows, something happened that changed everything. He reached for my daughter's hand, leaned closer, and whispered something into her ear. A cruel joke, maybe, or a test of dominance. I saw her face change instantly. Her smile faltered. Her fingers trembled, and in that second I realized he wasn't just cruel. He was proud of it. But fate has a strange way of protecting the innocent. Because right then, one of his friends, the one who had overheard him at the bar the night before, stood up. And in front of everyone, he said the words, "I will never forget. Maybe you should tell everyone what you said about humiliating her mother, Alex." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the music stopped. He froze. My daughter's hand slipped from his, and all eyes turned to him. I saw panic crawl into his expression, the kind that comes when someone realizes their mask has finally cracked. He tried to laugh it off, say it was a joke, but no one believed him. His arrogance had betrayed him before I ever had to. My daughter looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw it. That moment when love shatters and clarity takes its place. She took off her ring. Right there, in front of everyone. And when she turned to me, her eyes were full of tears, but also fire. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm done." I didn't move toward her. I didn't speak. I just nodded. And for the first time in years, I saw the woman I'd raised standing tall in her truth. The guests whispered. The hall stirred, and he, the man who thought he could humiliate us, stood alone. Red-faced, trembling with rage and embarrassment, he tried to speak, to salvage what little dignity he had left. but my daughter walked away before he could. Everyone else followed her lead, and as he stood there, abandoned by his own pride, I finally looked at him, calmly. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to say a single word, because sometimes watching someone destroy themselves with the very fire they lit for you is enough. In the days that followed, my daughter and I moved on quietly. We didn't gossip, didn't celebrate his downfall, didn't even mention his name again. We rebuilt, we healed. Months later, I saw him once, in a grocery store of all places. He looked smaller, dull eyes, messy hair, and that confident stride gone. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but it faltered halfway. He said softly, "I didn't mean for things to go that way." I looked at him for a moment, and then simply said, "Yes, you did. You just didn't expect the consequences." And then I walked away. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel victory. Just peace, the kind that comes from surviving the storm and realizing you never needed to fight thunder with thunder. Because grace, when wielded correctly, is the most humiliating revenge of all. That night, my daughter and I sat on the porch, watching the stars. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You always told me strength isn't about shouting. It's about standing tall quietly. I understand that now." I smiled, tears slipping down my face. Because she finally did. And so did I. We had both been broken, tested, and humiliated in ways that could have crushed us. But instead, we became something else. Unshakable, unapologetic, unforgotten. And that to me will always be the sweetest form of justice.